They called him the Liberator, the twice-born, the stranger from the east. He moved through torchlight and shadow with ivy at his brow, hair unbound, a staff of fennel tipped with a pine cone in his hand. Drums rolled like distant thunder, voices rose until joy and frenzy braided into one current, and at the center of that current stood him. Some swore he was gentleness itself, a god who dissolved sorrow with a cup and a song. Others learned he could be terror in human shape, a presence that snapped the thin threads of order and let the wild pour in. Either way, once he arrived, no one left unchanged. He was not like the other Olympians, who glittered in marble stillness atop their mountain. His realm was fluid, shifting like wine in a vessel, like the masks of an actor who wears a new self with each play. He walked among farmers and sailors, slaves and kings, women who defied their households, and men who broke the rules of their city. In every circle, he unsettled boundaries, joy and terror, sanity and madness, mortal and divine. He was Dionysus. Origins. His story begins with oaths and lightning. Zeus loved Semele, a mortal princess of Thebes. Hera, stung by jealousy, whispered suspicion into Semele's ear until the girl demanded to see Zeus as he truly was. Bound by promise, the god revealed himself, and the mortal body cannot hold a storm. Semele burned, yet a life remained within her. Zeus lifted the unborn child and sewed him into his own thigh until the time of birth. So the child came into the world twice, first from a mortal, then from a god, and the name Twice-born took root. But Hera's rage did not end with Semele's ashes. She hounded the child, sending madness and threats to consume him. To shield the infant, Zeus placed him in the care of Hermes, who disguised him in girlish garb and carried him into secret places. Some say he grew among the nymphs of Nysa, hidden in forests where streams whispered lullabies and ivy tangled the rocks. There, amid the hum of bees and the damp smell of soil, the boy learned freedom before he learned fear. Other voices spoke of darker beginnings. In Orphic tradition, he was not simply the son of Semele, but an older divinity reborn. Zagreus, child of Zeus and Persephone, once held the promise of succession. But the jealous Titans tore him limb from limb, devouring his flesh until only ash remained. From that ruin, Zeus salvaged a spark, shaping it into a new form, Dionysus. In this telling, he is more than a god of wine. He is the cycle of destruction and renewal itself, the truth that life emerges from death. Whichever tale you follow, the pattern is clear. His birth is secret, his childhood scattered, his very essence a contradiction. Mortal and divine, fragile and immortal, hunted and yet unstoppable. From the moment of his first cry, he carried within him both the wound of loss and the promise of resurrection. Appearance. No single form defines him. The earliest artists carved him as a robust figure, bearded, crowned, shoulders heavy with authority. He looked like a ruler of vines, a harvest god who held dominion over soil and growth. His staff, the thyrsus, crowned with a pine cone, announced his power over vitality itself, but the centuries softened his image. Vase painters and sculptors began to show him as a youth, almost androgynous, his body lithe, his hair long and curling like dark waves of wine. His beauty was unsettling, the kind that draws admiration and unease in equal measure. His eyes glimmered with duality, tenderness in one glance, frenzy in the next. His attire revealed his nature. Unlike the armored Athena or the regal Hera, he draped himself in flowing robes dyed in crimson and purple, the colors of ferment and revel. Around his brow twined ivy or vines bursting with grapes, as though nature itself crowned him. At times he wore the pelts of wild beasts, panther, leopard, bull, reminders that his divinity was not orderly, but untamed. Animals were never far. Panthers padded at his feet, serpents twined in the ivy at his shoulders, bulls pawed the ground. Where he passed, the air thickened with the scent of crushed grapes, of earth turned fertile, of fire and smoke. He was never fixed. One moment, a radiant boy. The next, a wrathful wanderer, crowned in ivy. Then, a beast-eyed god, radiating terror. His mutability was not weakness, but essence. Dionysus was transformation incarnate. Familial ties and companions. Dionysus's family ties were always fraught. To Zeus, he was a cherished son, born from the father's own body. To Hera, he was proof of betrayal, a living insult. Her hatred hounded him from infancy, forcing him into exile and wanderings far from Olympus. Perhaps that is why he found kinship more easily among mortals and outcasts than among the gods. Yet he was never without companions. Silenus, the old satyr with wine-stained wisdom, became his teacher and foster father, stumbling yet insightful, comic yet profound. Around him gathered satyrs with goat legs and mocking laughter, and maenads, women who abandoned loom and hearth for mountain rites. With ivy in their hair and wildness in their eyes, they danced themselves beyond reason, embodying the frenzy he inspired. Ariadne, abandoned princess of Crete, became his consort and queen. He crowned her not with sorrow, but with stars, placing her diadem in the heavens. Others drifted through his stories, youthful Ampelos, whose death birthed the grapevine, and nameless lovers of both sexes, testifying to a god who transcended mortal categories. Yet above all, his truest family were the outsiders, wanderers, revelers, the broken-hearted and the restless who found belonging in his rites. Personality, powers, and roles. To understand him is to hold contradictions at once. He was the god of wine, not the liquid itself, but what it did. Wine loosened the tongue, dissolved grief, birthed laughter, and blurred the strict edges of the self. But it also carried ruin, delirium, violence, collapse. Dionysus was both gift and danger. He ruled theater, where masks allowed mortals to step into other lives. The stage was itself a kind of intoxication, where illusion and reality mingled under the torchlight. Every Athenian tragedy and comedy opened with prayers to him, for performance was one of his sacred transformations. He was tied also to fertility, to the cycles of seed and harvest, growth and decay. The swelling of grapes, the return of spring after barren winter, the howl of wild beasts in the dark, all bore his imprint. Above all, he was the god of boundaries dissolving. Man and woman, joy and terror, mortal and immortal, he turned borders into doors. For those who welcomed him, he was a liberator, lifting burdens and offering vision. For those who resisted, he was madness, destruction, and divine retribution. His power was not predictable, it was essential. To deny him was to deny the forces that move beneath every life. Dionysus, in contrast to Apollo. Greek thought often paired him with Apollo, his seeming opposite. Apollo stood for order, clarity, logic, and discipline. Dionysus embodied chaos, passion, ecstasy, and dissolution. Yet the Greeks did not set them at war. They saw them as two halves of a greater whole. Apollo gave measure to song, Dionysus gave it soul. One without the other was sterile or destructive. Together they formed the spectrum of human experience, the daylight of reason and the midnight of rapture. Later philosophers, from Plato to Nietzsche, would return to this tension, naming it the Apollonian and the Dionysian, the eternal dance between order and chaos. Mystery cults and initiation. Public festivals of Dionysus were wild enough, but beneath them lay secret rites, the mysteries. These were not drunken gatherings, but carefully structured initiations. Worshippers adorned themselves with ivy crowns and fawn skins, carrying torches into the night. They chanted and danced, losing themselves in ecstasy, but the goal was not mere indulgence, it was transcendence. In Orphic tradition, these rites offered glimpses of the afterlife. Initiates hoped to be freed from the endless cycle of death and rebirth, to join Dionysus in a purified realm beyond the grave. Symbols of death and resurrection filled the ceremonies: wine pressed from crushed grapes, milk and honey flowing from the earth, sparagmos, the tearing apart of animals or symbols, followed by renewal. To be initiated was to taste death and survive, to understand that the soul itself could be remade. The Bacchae, Dionysus versus Pentheus. When Dionysus returned to Thebes, his mother's city, he came crowned in ivy and followed by Maenads. But the people had forgotten or chosen to deny him. Pentheus, young king and cousin to the god, mocked his rites as shameful. He accused women of abandoning their homes for drunken debauchery, sneered at the delicate beauty of the stranger who preached this new cult, and ordered him imprisoned. The stranger, Dionysus in disguise, only smiled. Chains fell away on their own. The palace shook as if struck by an earthquake. Still Pentheus raged, blind to the divinity before him. So the god set a trap. He invited Pentheus to see the rites with his own eyes. Vanity and suspicion overcame him, and he allowed himself to be dressed as a woman to spy on the Maenads in the mountains. There, amid torchlight and frenzy, Pentheus was mistaken for prey. Divine madness seized the women. They tore him apart. With bare hands, his own mother Agave leading the charge, believing in her delirium that he was a lion. Only when she carried his severed head back to the city did the fog lift, and horror took its place. The Bacchae, Euripides' tragedy, preserves. The lesson: Dionysus may bring joy, but those who deny him meet terror. His presence is inevitable. To resist is to be undone. Dionysus and Ariadne. On the island of Naxos, beneath a sky strewn with stars, a young woman woke to betrayal. Ariadne, princess of Crete, had given Theseus the means to conquer the labyrinth and the Minotaur within. She had left behind father, kingdom, and honor for him, trusting in promises of love and marriage. Yet when dawn rose, she found herself alone, abandoned on the shore, while his sails vanished into the horizon. It was then Dionysus came. Some say he was drawn to her grief, others that fate had destined her for him all along. Where Theseus deserted, Dionysus lifted. He crowned her with a diadem radiant as the night sky, and when her mortal days ended, he cast that crown into the heavens as the constellation Corona Borealis. Through Ariadne, Dionysus revealed his gentler face, not vengeance, but redemption, not frenzy, but eternal companionship. In some versions, the story held a darker edge. Dionysus confronted Theseus directly, clouding his mind with forgetfulness so that he failed to change his sails, sending his father Aegeus into the sea in despair. The lesson was clear: mortal faithlessness could wound, but divine fidelity could transform. Where Theseus faltered, Dionysus fulfilled. Ariadne's grief became her gateway to immortality. Dionysus and the Pirates. Another tale spoke of hubris on the sea. Sailors, seeing a beautiful youth on a lonely shore, seized him, imagining ransom and profit. Only the helmsman trembled. "Release him," he begged. "There is power in his eyes." But greed deafened his companions. They bound the boy and sailed away. The air stilled, the ropes loosened, and from the ship's timbers burst vines heavy with grapes. Ivy crawled over mast and oar, twisting until the vessel groaned under the weight of green life. Then came beasts, a lion at the prow, a bear pacing the deck. Terror seized the sailors. They leapt into the sea. Most drowned, but Dionysus showed mercy. He transformed some into dolphins, condemned yet honored, to guide mortals across the waves forever. Only the helmsman was spared, untouched, rewarded for his recognition. The story reminded all who heard it that the god could appear in fragile form, but beneath the disguise lived a power older and wilder than the sea itself. Dionysus and Hephaestus. Not all his victories came in terror. When Hephaestus ensnared Hera in a golden throne of his own design, no god could persuade him to release her. Neither threats nor pleas stirred him. Years of rejection and mockery hardened him against his kin. Then Dionysus approached, not with force, but with wine and fellowship. He poured cup after cup until laughter softened the smith's bitterness, until stubbornness loosened into ease. Arm around his shoulder, Dionysus led him stumbling back to Olympus, where Hephaestus freed Hera at last. This tale taught that persuasion, laughter, and intoxication could succeed where thunderbolts and strategies failed. Power is not only storm and spear, but also song, charm, and the strange truth carried in a cup of wine. Dionysus and King Midas. Among mortals, none was marked by Dionysus more than Midas of Phrygia. The king treated Silenus with reverence when the old satyr wandered drunk into his gardens, offering him shelter for 10 days. Grateful, Dionysus granted Midas one wish. The king asked that everything he touched turn to gold. At first delight filled him. Branches became treasure, stones, coins, palace walls, radiant metal. But hunger soon clawed at him. Bread crumbled into lifeless ore, wine froze into hard amber. Worst of all, when his daughter ran to embrace him, she turned to a golden statue, shining and silent. Desperate, Midas begged the god for release. Dionysus, merciful, directed him to wash in the river Pactolus. The curse flowed into its waters, leaving behind golden sands that gleamed for ages. The tale was remembered not simply as folly, but as instruction. Dionysus gives gifts that mirror the heart. Seek joy, and you may find freedom. Seek greed, and you will taste ruin. Yet even then he tempered punishment with grace. The return to Olympus. For years, Dionysus wandered through Asia, Thrace, the islands of the Aegean, teaching his rites, gathering followers, sparking terror in kings who tried to deny him. He seemed more at home among mortals, satyrs, and nymphs than among his fellow gods. Yet the circle of his journey always bent back to Olympus. Some Olympians doubted his right to sit among them. His mortal mother tainted his blood, his rites threatened order, and Hera's hatred never cooled. Yet Zeus would not see his twice-born son denied. From his own body had Dionysus been born, and from his decree he was given his seat. So the god who had been hunted, disguised, and doubted entered the halls of Olympus not as guest, but as one of the 12. He did not bring law like Zeus, wisdom like Athena, or war like Ares. He brought the wild, the ecstatic, the truth that chaos too was divine. From that day, every play performed, every grape crushed, every ritual of transformation belonged to Olympus itself. Dionysus and Ampelos. Among his companions, none shone brighter than Ampelos, a youth whose very name meant vine. Dionysus loved him dearly, delighting in his beauty and vitality. Together, they played in fields, their laughter carrying like music. But joy in myth is always fleeting. In one version, Ampelos, reckless with youth, dared to ride a bull. The beast threw him, goring him to death. In another, the gods themselves, jealous of Dionysus's happiness, struck him down. Whatever the cause, grief consumed the god. From the youth's blood sprang the first grapevine, heavy with fruit that held both sweetness and sorrow. Pressed and fermented, it became wine, the gift Dionysus offered humanity, a liquid that carried within it memory of love and loss. Ampelos did not vanish. He lived on in every libation, every cup raised in the God's name. Misconceptions. Over time, mortals forgot the depth of Dionysus. To some, he became only a figure of drunkenness, staggering with a goblet, mocked in comedies as soft and foolish. Yet the ancients knew better. Wine was never his essence but his symbol, pointing to what lies beneath: transformation, release, the dissolving of boundaries. His rites were not mere revels. The Bacchic mysteries were carefully structured: approach with preparation, enter frenzy, and then return renewed. They offered catharsis, healing, and a glimpse of eternity. To resist him was dangerous, but to embrace him with reverence was to step closer to the divine. Nor was he a lesser god. Though mortal-born, he was an Olympian by decree, his influence spreading across Greece, into Rome, and far beyond. To underestimate him was folly. Kings who did so, Pentheus, Lycurgus, and others, met ruin. The god was not harmless. He was liberation, but also reckoning. Legacy. Though he began as an outsider, Dionysus became one of the most enduring gods of the ancient world. In Athens, festivals such as the city Dionysia and the rural Dionysia were held in his honor. Every tragedy and comedy was first an offering to him. The mask, the stage, the chorus, all were his domain. Theater itself, the art that shaped Western drama, was born from his rites. His cult spread across the Mediterranean and into Rome, where he was called Bacchus. There too his duality unsettled rulers. The Bacchanalia, secret rites held at night, were at times celebrated, at times suppressed, feared as threats to civic order. Yet suppression could never erase him. The longing for release, for ecstasy, for transcendence always found voice. Philosophers later used him as symbol. In Nietzsche's writings, the Dionysian represented raw vitality, set against the Apollonian order. Together, they shaped the rhythm of art, culture, and life itself. Even now, his shadow lingers. In theater, in music that dissolves the self into rhythm, in festivals that blur social lines, in the shared drink that turns strangers into companions, Dionysus walks. His gift is not only intoxication, but the paradox of existence. The joy and sorrow, creation and destruction are bound together. He is still the liberator, the twice-born, the stranger whose presence unsettles and remakes. To lose oneself in him, even for a moment, is to glimpse the divine. And so, Dionysus remains the eternal stranger, joy and terror in one, the god who teaches that transformation is never safe, but always sacred. If you enjoyed this journey into myth, don't forget to like the video, share it with a friend, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story we bring to life. Until then, raise a cup and remember, the divine is never far away.